He retired just 1 year ago.
Oh, that's really? Brooke Chase.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He was in which department?
He was up here.
And up there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember the calendar he had on his desk. You remember that?
I don't know if he ever let me see it.
Oh, he had his wife gave him a gift of a calendar. And I walked in, the first time I saw it, I just looked at him and says, "Don't let the HR department see that." He says, "They can't say anything. It's my wife."
One can only imagine what this calendar looks like.
Well, let's put it this way. You ever seen the fans for the old striptease? That's what she was wearing, and that was it. He was a good guy.
Inspiration for the...
In order to save the reputation of certain people.
We won't put that one on.
I mean, do you know Brooke's third wife?
No.
Oh, good. Okay, well, neither here nor there. But I'm sure that the wife in question there was the wife number 2.
Well, let's get down to it, Danny. Danny Johnston, thanks for agreeing to this idea. So I got the email from Ted that it's a great title, the janitor who connected Weber State to the internet, basically, And
yeah, right. Around that time, though, yeah, I was custodial.
You were custodial then?
Oh yeah, I started custodial back here. It was an hourly in late 80s. Early 90s.
Were you a student before then?
Oh, yeah. I was a student the whole time.
So when did you start going to school here? Early 80s?
Late 80s, early 90s.
Late 80s, early 90s. And CS, computer science?
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
You've been playing around with computers before that, though?
My dad was a programmer for Hillfield. So I started playing around with punch cards, paper tape, the old CRTs when I'm 17 years old. So, yeah, I was always playing with computers one way or the other.
When you came here, were you right out of high school?
No, actually, I graduated in '84 and took time to play around. So it was 86 to 88, somewhere in there that I came in.
Okay. And with the punch cards, cool.
Punch cards, old paper tape, the old printouts back before we had graphics where you'd punch out the characters.
The green bar paper.
Oh yeah, the green bar paper. I had a Snoopy done up at Hill, just with text. You get up close, you'd see text. You walk back, and you could see Snoopy.
So late 80s. Who's in CS then? There's Kapner, I guess?
Kapner was there.
Kapner and
I'm trying to think. Red Critman.
Wolford?
Ron Peterson.
Ron Peterson?
I think Ron Peterson was starting right around the same time I started. I think he was my CS 101 class. And yeah, we had Wolford. Or Wooly, as we called him. And his Wolfordized code.
What does that mean?
Well, C code has Kernighan Ritchie style, where you line the squiggly brackets up with the I on the if statement and the close squiggly right underneath it. Wolford used this other method that you would indent the squigglies, and then everything would be lined up with the squigglies for the indentation. And we always had fun with that, because we'd get his code and you just start looking at it and go, I can't read this. In fact, Dave Harvey, me and Wolford one time had a screaming match over proper style in the lab. And we had students just booking this way and that way, because, we're just top of our lungs screaming at each other. End of the thing goes, Wolford's, I gotta go. Oh, okay, we'll see you later. We're all just totally calm. Everybody else is just sitting there going, was I thought we were going to go to each other's throats. Because Dave had found a book, and he's sitting there reading going, Danny, this is hard to read, isn't it? Well, oh, look up. It's been Wolfordized!
Unbelievable. So it's more than just him, I guess, is doing
it was a secondary standard way of doing things, but it was often left field. I remember he had a couple of students that were just totally infuriated because I had one guy, he managed to basically bomb both of his finals, one from Wolfer's class, one from another class, because when he was doing his finals, it had C code in it, and he knew he had to Wolfordize one of them, and he Wolfordized the wrong one, so he got knocked down on style from the one teacher, and he had Kernighan Ritchie style on Wolford, so Wolford knocked him down.
It's unbelievable. I'm glad they were looking at it so closely, though, that they're worried about the style there.
No, Wolford graded on that. You handed in a paper that wasn't in the proper style he wanted it. Oh yeah, you got knocked down.
Hey, at least they have some kind of style. Go ahead, Ted.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think you are an interesting person to talk to from the standpoint of Weber State's IT history, because obviously one of the big things that's happened in IT over the last 15 years or so is the internet.
Yeah.
And I might learn today that I'm wrong, but from my perspective, as much as anybody, you were in the middle of and really did a lot of the plumbing for getting Weber State first connected to the internet.
We did a lot of it.
How did and I think you mentioned that actually before the institution got interested in the internet, the computer science department got connected. Tell me about that.
Well, originally, when we first started trying to get hooked up, we had a gentleman by the name of Wes Peters and his brother. They worked at Unisys. And originally, our first connection to the internet, well, it wasn't even the internet at that time, it was the UUNet, was actually dial-up modems using UUCP to connect up to them. And as the internet started blooming...
You connected to Sperry?
We connected to...
Or Unisys?
I think we were connected directly to Unisys. If we weren't directly to Unisys, we were connected to one of Wes's computers at home, which was connected to them.
Okay. Was it Unisys at the time, or was it still Sperry?
It was Unisys at the time. It was Unisys at the time. But
where you say when we were interested, who was we?
The computer science department.
Students, faculty, both?
Most of it was student driven. There was me, Terry Lambert, Wes Peters, Johnny Peters, Val Karchner, and Dave Martin, I believe it was. And we were running the computers down there pretty much. There wasn't anybody who was being paid to run the computers. It was all student run. And we set up and decided that we wanted to get hooked up for like UUCP News and stuff like that. So that's the way we first started out. After we started looking at the internet, it was eventually we're going to get the internet. We knew it. So we wanted to make sure that we got the Weaver.edu domain and a Class A network space. I think that's what we have, isn't it?
Class B.
Is it Class B?
Mm-hmm.
All right, then it wasn't Class A. But we knew we needed the network addresses and the names. So I believe it was Dr. Kavner got the money for it, and we went out and grabbed the addresses up and grabbed the namespace up.
Do you remember how expensive it was back then?
Off the top of my head, I do not know how much you paid for it. I think the prices ran anywhere from $35 to $50 a year.
Yeah.
For each. So the name would cost about that much. The address space would cost about that much.
Who was controlling it back then?
It was all done through, I believe, internet. That was before we had the branch off of all the people selling network addresses, and it was all done through the government. It wasn't until many years later that they actually split up and you could buy domains from Joe's Domain Place.
Right.
And there used to be just a central repository for the addresses.
So you were telling a funny story earlier that...
Eventually, it was after we had got all the address space together, and we knew we didn't have a connection, the campus finally started looking into getting an actual connection to the internet. And they decided they wanted the Weber.edu. And they asked for it, and it come back that somebody already had it. It took about 3 or 4 days before somebody looked at the records and realized it was licensed to Weber State University Computer Science Department. And they're coming down going, we were going to get this, but you guys already got it. We're like, yeah, we got the name. We also got this address space. I hope you're not getting more address space. Oh, okay.
A class, in this day and age, Class B license is valuable.
Oh, yeah. Extremely valuable.
It's help. We a lot of institutions in Utah don't have a Class B license. It's been quite a luxury for us to.
Is that true? So there's only a couple institutions, academic institutions, that have Class B?
I believe so.
Well, there's quite a few of them, but the problem is that the way the address space is broken up, there's not enough address space. That's one of the reasons why they're looking at the IP6, or I should say they're going to the IP6 if they ever get there, was because when you start out with the internet, you had, what did they call it back in the ARPANET? I think it was ARPANET. You had a maximum of 256 addresses, period. And once they got it where they thought, yeah, this is going to work, they increased it from 1 byte to 4 bytes worth of address space, and they broke them down into Class A's, Class B's, Class C's. And so with the breakdown and everything, they're going, oh, we'll have plenty. Because mostly it was for military and educational facilities only. But then companies started coming in. Companies started going, hey, yeah, this looks great. We'll get on board. And they found out that they didn't have near enough because the way the addresses are broken up, you have, I believe it's 127 Class A's. And that's including the loopback Class A, which by itself is a Class A. Nobody can use the address space 127 dot whatever except for loopback devices. And Class B's were 128 through, let's see, 128, there's 64, forget it, I'm not doing the math. But you have 64 Class B's, and then the rest was Class C's. It wasn't until late 90s that they started looking at it going, oh boy, we're having problems, and they actually took a bunch of the Class C's and said, we're making Class D's and Class E's for just between routers. So
we've held on to the Class B. No one had the authority.
Once you got it, you got it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
What do you recall who was it from computing, or who was it who approached the computer science department? Can you recall?
I don't. I would imagine the people who got Dr. Bob interested was probably Wes Peters or Johnny Peters.
Mm-hmm.
But I am not sure. That actually was before my time when we actually had the address space. Mm-hmm. Because I was coming in at that time.
Yeah. So and do you know who it was that came downstairs and asked you to give it to the university?
Truthfully, I don't know.
Do you remember Roy Stock?
I think it was probably Roy. Now,
who's Roy Stock?
He used to be over the computing services area. If I remember correctly, isn't that right? One of those people I remember by face but not by name. That's unusual for me. Usually I can't remember either.
So they already had the address space when you came in?
Yes, I believe so.
By not too long?
Like I said, I'm not sure how long they had it. When I come in, we were hooked up to UUCP already. Wes and Johnny had got that set up, and I'm quite certain we already had bought the address space, or we could have bought it while I just was starting to come in.
So how did the UUCP work?
UUCP, basically, you had modems with phones, or phones with modems attached, and you would run a batch job which would say, send these files off to computer B. And so it would dial up computer B and say, hey, I got these files for you, and try to send them across. And then as soon as it got done, it'd say, computer B, do you have any files for me? And it would send them back across. Do you remember the internet worm, or what they called the internet worm? Yeah. Actually, it traveled across both the internet and UUCP. The day that guy was released, I was working as a lab aide, got a call. It was either Johnny or Wes saying, hey, go unplug the modem. We got this thing floating around. You do not want it. I've already shut down systems over here, but you guys need to shut down yours. So we ended up pulling our UUCP connection for about 2 or 3 days over that. Because that's one of the ways it would travel, is it would take, and with UUCP, you not only had the abilities to send files and receive files, but you could also run remote jobs on the remote system. Because that's how the UUNet worked, mostly. Like the Usenet News. Basically, what would happen is Site A would call up and say, I've got these files, and send them down and run a job to incorporate them into the UU News database. And anyone's created there would also be reset up and sent back. So UUCP is a call-on-demand job type thing.
So Wes and
Johnny.
Yeah, Wes and Johnny were at Unisys. And
I think one of them or both of them worked at Unisys at the time.
Now, was it a local call, essentially? You were calling from here to them?
It was, I think we had, like I said, I think we had an intermediate system we were calling into. But it was a local phone call from us to the nearest hop, and it was a local phone call for them to the next hop.
Okay.
None of it was long distance.
And is that the way it typically worked? You found people that were still local, and then...
Yeah. You'd tie into net locally, and if you wanted to send a file to someone, it got pretty complicated, because unlike today where, say I want to mail Joe at Hotmail, I put Joe at hotmail.com. With UUCP, you would say, I want to send a mail message to Cyrus, ! Guinevere, ! Whatever, ! Hotmail, ! Joe. And as it would go, the system would grab it and grab the first part before the ! And say, oh, I want to call this system here. And then it would tear that part off. That system would get it and grab the next section, and I want to call this system here. So you actually had, in the address space, the route it would take to get to someone.
So to get onto the internet, would you get to U of U at some point? It's through local calls? The different nodes down to University of Utah?
Actually, no, most of it, we would local call to the local machine to get hold of Unisys, and Unisys at that time had a internet connection.
Okay.
And if I remember correctly, when the worm went out, they ended up pulling their internet connection. I know at that time, most of the MILNet on the internet went away. Because this thing started crawling around and they just cut it off. And the sad thing is that if it wouldn't have been for what Morris claimed was a error in his code, that thing still could have been crawling around the world today. Because the problem it had, and even UCB Berkeley, when they re-engineered the code, looking at it, he had a logic error which said, it was supposed to have said, if I've already infected this system, don't do anything. If I haven't, fork off a copy and start calling this place, fork off another copy, start calling this place, and propagate that way, and there was a reversal in the logic bug, or in the logic, which basically what would happen is it'd come in and it'd just start calling this place, and it'd call this place, and it'd call this place, one process. But if it already identified that it'd been on this system, it forked like mad and just drove the system into the ground. It actually used the security holes that was in UUCP at the time, still is, in fact, and the get S bug that was in most finger daemons, where they would overrun the buffer and go to the next buffer and put in /bin/shell and pull the shell. So
What does UUCP stand for?
Unix to Unix copy.
And these are all Unix machines for the most part?
For the most part.
And what about here?
We had a Alpha Micro running Ultrix. We had a Unisys box running, I believe, a variety of System 5. I think that was the two Unix boxes we had downstairs, and they were the ones that were doing all the transfers. We did have one VMS box running VMS, of course.
So what, and Ted was getting to this too, was when did it come down that the campus wanted to connect up? That was, and were you around at that time, Ted,
Yeah,
as
he
well?
was around.
And where were you? Were you in computer science or?
He was computing service.
You were computing services.
Wasn't
You were in English?
Look at the grin.
Yeah, those were that would have been somewhat fighting words. I was in academic computing.
Oh, I see what you're saying. A whole nother issue.
Yes. But which was physically located up here. And we were with the group that was called Computing Services. No, I misspeak. Actually, we were organizationally, we were blended together there, although we were within Computing Services. We were two different branches. My understanding was that somehow or another the university was made aware that the NSF had money for connecting universities to the internet, what was called the internet, and that this was a good thing, and that we should get ourselves connected, and that they had the money to do it, and we should apply for a grant to do it. And so a grant was written. My counterpart, my position title was user consultant in academic computing. There were two user consultants. The other one, a fellow named Jim Miner, was maybe he wrote the grant. He was the principal investigator, listed principal investigator on the grant. I'm not exactly sure what they did with the grant, other than around the same time a Cisco device showed up here. I presume maybe they bought it with the grant. which had probably something like a T1 interface or 56 kilobyte
I think
line
the first one was
interface,
56.
and an Ethernet interface on the other side. And it arrived here, and people unpacked it, and I wasn't real close to this process or what was going on, but I surmised then that nobody quite knew what to do with it. And shortly after that, I started seeing Danny up here.
Yeah.
So is that true? Did they contact you and ask you for assistance?
Basically, they contacted Kavner and all of us lab rats. Just basically come up and said, well, yeah, this is the way you should do it, we think. We're not sure because nobody's really trained anybody on this. So there was some mess-ups when we first were setting it up, but we had more idea of what was going on with addressing, etc., than the people up here really did. I mean, most of your computers up here were VAX BMS. You had no real TCP/IP up here. The only people who were running TCP/IP pretty much was downstairs. I mean, your Windows boxes were connected up with IPX, and TCP/IP just was not used anywhere really except Unix boxes.
Were there were Windows boxes at the time?
Well, there was a couple that were interconnected. We were running at the time. We had the thick wire with AUI connections. In fact, as most of the backbone was thick wire, we had your thin wire, like your coaxial cable, that was run from the backbone out to different offices. The fact is, we had one professor that got looking at his box and says, "Why do I got this T thing here? I'm at the end of the cable." Plugs it in, brings down the whole network, and we had to go. Or the students had to go scream at him, going, "You can't do that."
Now that's interesting. So the students go and scream at him.
At the time, students were the ones running the computer science area. I mean, like I said, there was nobody being paid for it. Dr. Kavner, back before I started in, when they first got the VAX boxes, went, "Hey guys, we got these computers. You guys want to run it?" Dave Martin and Val Karchner said, "Oh yeah, we'll run the BMS box." And it was Johnny, Wes, and Terry that said, "Oh, we'll run the Ultrix box." And fact is, the only reason I got started on it was I started poking my nose around and found a user named Jay Hawk with a user ID of 0 and a group ID of 1. And I looked at that and went, "That's right. Hey, don't have a password." Walked over, sat down next to Johnny and says, "Hey, Johnny, look at this. Jay Hawk, no password, ID, I'm Rut." And I got about this big around, went, "Oh!"
And they said, "You got to be around here. We need you."
No, it was basically, "Can you get rid of it?" I says, "Yeah, can I add myself a R account?" "Yeah, sure." Because we had the root, and then we had a R Terry, and a R Wes, and a R Johnny, and so I went and added an R Danny with UID of 0, put a password on it, and I basically, after Johnny and Wes had gone off a little bit more, nobody was really there, I started running the Ultrix box. All of our work was voluntary. Nobody got paid.
Not even as lab rats.
Well, lab rats was the people who basically lived in the lab.
Okay.
The lab aides, now, we did have lab aides getting paid, but lab aides were just there to help the users. The lab rats, we were the ones that were administrating the system. In fact, Dr. Kavner's daughter, I can't remember which one, basically gave the guys the nickname Lab Rats because we were always in the lab scurrying around. And it was late 90s. She came back and was visiting her dad, came back to the lab, and one of us popped off with a comment about a lab rat. She's just sitting there with her jaw hanging on the ground because it was supposed to be an insulting term, and we took it and just ran with it. Now, lab rats were basically the people who had keys into the lab. I mean, at that time, there was, I don't know, maybe 10 people. I don't know, maybe now. Let's see, there was probably 6 or 7 people actually had a key to the outside door so that we could get into the lab, get into the back room, and jump on the console and take care of what problems there was.
So when you talked about the professor that disconnected themselves because they decided they wanted to be at the end of the line, was that a computer science professor that decided?
Actually, yeah, that was a computer science professor.
That's a bit embarrassing.
His was the last office, and he didn't understand why he had a T with this thing hanging on the end instead of plugging it right into the box, and we had to go in there and, where's the T? Oh, well, I didn't think it was necessary, so we grabbed the T, hooked it back on, says, this is a terminator. This has to be hooked up. This is why it's hooked this way. Oh, okay, I won't undo it again.
What was the net? Was it token ring or Ethernet or?
It was Ethernet, but it was cross coax cable.
Their network down there.
Yeah.
It's still there, hanging out the.
Yeah, there's actually in the offices in the hall up here a segment of it too, that's still hanging out. Mm-hmm. Coax cable comes up, goes to T, and right back down. Yeah. At that time period, I mean, thin wire.
Yeah, I still have something hanging from the ceiling in my office.
I think Dr. Capner still has a couple of AUI cables hanging down from up here.
Around that time, the university started laying some fiber optic cables.
So what
to connect?
What time is this? This is 90 something.
93 maybe.
Yeah, 92, 93.
Yeah.
And again, the time frame that the university had started having the discussion about Weaver.edu and
that was early 90s.
Early 90s.
Now the only lab rat or computer science student that I can recall seeing up here actively helping people was you.
Yeah, that's pretty true.
Do you think that there were others involved, or did you just consult with them and then come up and help?
There was others involved. The thing was that most of the lab rats, like Johnny and Wes, had a job outside the campus, and they were basically graduated, so they were volunteering their time. We had Dave and Val. They were working at the time, doing their student stuff, so they weren't around much. Terry, I think, was also working at, I think he was working at Century Software. So they really weren't around that much during the day. Mm-hmm. We'd get together and throw things around at night, but mostly I was the only one here, so I probably was the only one that was seen. Because at that time I was a student, I was up here all the time.
One of the first things I presume that would have needed to be done was to configure the Cisco box. That what was it? What's that called? AGS? ASG? AGS? What is that?
And is that the Cisco box we have in the display?
I think it is.
Probably is.
Let's go look at it sometime and see. Did you configure that box?
I did not configure that box. I had no clue how to configure that box. I knew how TCP/IP was supposed to work, and we sat down, and I believe when we bought the box, somebody actually came in from Cisco because nobody really knew how to configure it. Mm-hmm. And we told them, look, this is the network we're using. And so we had the internet coming into that box and then just being branched off through hubs, or not even hubs, bridges, to different areas. And at the time, I suggested that they assign different subnets of the 137.190 address space to different buildings or areas within buildings, because eventually we were going to have to get intermediate routers between the buildings and get a redundant net set up, because at the time everything was bridged. So, I mean, we were running IPX, we were running DECnet, and those were the two major ones we were running, because most of the computers were just PCs, and we had the VMS boxes.
One big flat address space.
It was one big flat address space, and we sat down and carved it up into subnets, but they were only logical subnets between the buildings, because eventually we knew we were going to have to get routers in between them. And if I remember right, my brother got chewed because I didn't tell him quite right, and it was like, well, guys, I'm new to this too. I mean, I'm telling you what I know, what I've learned on my own, and yeah, it's possible I've made mistakes, but you are going to want to put routers in. And you don't do something like this, you're going to end up with a real headache when you try to put your router in, because right now everything was just, like I said, bridged. And they weren't even really smart bridges.
The other big thing that needed to be done, at least from our perspective, you guys had machines that were already running TCP and probably running TCP applications already.
Yeah.
But to make them, this campus up here, mostly at that time, ran on the VAX. So the thing that needed to be done was to load an TCP/IP protocol on the VAX.
Right.
Were you involved in? Do you know? Were you involved in configuring that?
I wasn't involved in that because that was, like I said, on BMS, and if anybody downstairs would have been involved in that, that would have been probably Dave Martin and Val Karchner, because they were our VMS gurus down there. So where it would be installing that, they probably were the only persons that downstairs who knew how to set it up. I mean, with what we had downstairs, we had homegrown applications. It's like our printer was off the VMS box. We had some Unisys boxes, we had the Ultrix, and we actually wrote our own printer daemon software that was sitting on the Ultrix box because it was a cross between VMS and Unix. And we had all of our TCP/IP machines connecting up to it, and from it, putting onto VMS, sending the VMS box and going out to the printer. And getting information on the VMS system was, well, extremely difficult. Dave was one of these people that, oh, you're not supposed to know about that. I'll take care of it.
So this is Dave who again?
Dave Martin.
Dave Martin.
Was he the Val's running buddy?
Yeah.
They were.
They were at that time very close.
See, I was kind of low profile, but kind of at the beginning of that era, I was a student downstairs. Johnny and Dave and Val.
Terry, I think was there at that time too, wasn't he?
Yeah. He was. I didn't really know him. I benefited from all the work that they did as a student because they really set up the lab environment down there.
So you were a student down there before he showed up?
Could have been. My graduation date was 88, but I think the last classes I actually took were in summer of 87, last CS class.
That would have been right before I showed up.
But you have a degree in another field also, right? Before you went to computer science? But that was years?
Several.
Several. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
From Weber State?
No.
Oh, okay. But you were working in academic computing before.
No, I started. I had classes in 87. Well, probably 85, 86, and 87. My official graduation date was 88, and then I started working here in December of 88.
And academic
And we
computing.
started, and gosh, I really can't recall when I first heard the phrase internet and the idea that we could connect, in a direct way to other places.
Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to take a quick break.
So you were going to ask a question.
Danny, I was at some separation from the process up here. I was not part of administrative computing.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't close to the operation of the VAC system, and so I didn't really know what was going on with it. There was a period of time when I seemed to see you up here frequently, and I can recall in some staff meetings I don't know if this ever got back to you, but some discussions, and I might be misremembering this, but some discussions about the extent of your privileges that you had on the VAX.
I didn't have any privileges on the VAX other than the student account.
Really? Well, maybe I misread.
There could have been people suggesting that we were given privileges, but at the time, since the VAX was running accounting and all that other stuff, they were like, no. Now, I did have privileges on the VAX system that we had downstairs, but with the systems up here, no. In fact, I'm pretty sure that a couple of people had suggested to give us some privileges, and they looked at it and said, no, we cannot do that. These are not employees of the campus. These are students, and we weren't exactly trusted.
So you're never paid for the work that you did up here?
No, it was strictly voluntary. All of our work down there, except for like being a lab aide, was strictly voluntary.
And even the work that you did when you came up here to work with Bruce and Brooke and Roy?
Yeah, that was strictly
No,
voluntary.
I didn't realize that. I assumed that they were...
Oh, no.
Oh, they're cheap buggers. They should...
Well, we would have liked it, but mostly they were, I hate to say this, totally clueless on the TCP/IP, and we were the only ones that had experience, so they were trying to pick our brains at it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
And we didn't have a problem with it. We were just trying to help out the campus.
Yeah, I'll say, I kind of said this, at that time, the culture and thinking up here was entirely VAC-centered. DECNAT and LAT were all anybody cared about in terms of protocols. And so, yeah, just absolutely, there's no knowledge, I'm sure, about TCP.
There wasn't. It wasn't until after we got wired up that they started looking at TCP/IP. They were, well, it was basically us against them situation, and we were the competitor, but they were picking our brains, and we were happy to let them because we wanted to get the campus on the internet, and the CS department couldn't pay for it. I mean, we got the address space and everything, but there was no way we could get the connection. And through the grant, they were able to get that connection.
And the equipment.
And the equipment to hook it up. So we were just like, oh, great, we're going to be on the internet. Let's help them out so we can get our Usenet news and everything else that we're hooking up with.
News was a big
News was a
internet
big-
application
Yeah.
in the early days.
It was.
What else did you guys favor down there?
Mostly just news and TCP/IP, being able to take and connect up to different places, and
Oh yeah, but connect how? Can you recall what you do?
a lot of it was just you would TCP/IP into a external site and be able to browse stuff. That was way before the web even was a thought. Wasn't until late 90s web started taking off, if I remember right. And we just wanted to get connected up because it'd make it a lot easier for us to go out to libraries, to different things like that. But number one was the Usenet newsfeed. I mean, we already had it via UUCP, but you would post something, and with the way UUCP works, with this system calling this system, like I said, it was a cross between call on demand and call on time. If you had a lot of files, it would call. If you didn't, it'd wait until a certain time period and then call. And you'd post something on the internet or on the Usenet, and it would take up to a week for it to propagate across and other messages to propagate back to you. We got it hooked up to the internet, and it was like, post this, and the main servers were already being notified as soon as you got done posting. So that was the main one, was the Usenet news.
What about email?
Email back then really wasn't anything major because nobody was really connected. You had the UUCP mail that worked quite nicely, but you had the delays. But most of it was the news groups, alt.binaries, alt.sources, stuff like that. Of course, we know the number one was alt.sex, but
The kind of the first thing I noticed about being on the internet was what was email, was the ability to send email and get back a fairly quick response if you knew somebody.
right.
And then a lot of the addresses, though, were bitnet addresses.
Mm-hmm.
I can't recall exactly what bitnet was or how it worked, but it had kind of a cumbersome address scheme. It wasn't as bad as UUCP. But you'd have to write out this bitnet address and then say @bitnet.
Yeah, bitnet. A lot of the mail that was going through bitnet. Bitnet was actually a gateway for the internet. So you had the internet setting on one side, you had the bitnet setting on the other, and you send your mail via bitnet to wherever it needed to go and back through. We did the same thing with UUCP. We would jump to different UUCP sites, and if one was connected up to the internet, we could go from that site and jump 30, 40 addresses and continue on our path. But with the email upstairs, I can see that being a big change because, like I said, we had UUCP, and UUCP, even though it had a good delay on the email, I believe it was better than bitnet was. So, from the student's point of view, most of it was news. There was some, like I say, some email, but most of it was the news feeds and stuff like that.
Were you doing a lot of technology news?
Technology news, sharing of binaries of games, stuff like that. I mean, let's face it, not legal, but it was done. A lot of discussion groups. One of the fun ones we had once we got the internet up was what they called MUDs, multi-user dungeons. There for a while, I think over half the people in the lab were sitting down, pulling up tiny, I think it was, what was that called? I can't remember the name of the program, but it was specifically tanked up to MUDs. And you'd go role play. And they were designed something like the old Zort game. Go north. Here's your description of the room. But the fun part was, since it was multi-user, you'd have somebody else come in and start chatting with you, join up on quests. Actually, for a while, we were running what they called a mush, which is a version of MUD. It's a multi-user dungeon, but it was done by it was multi-user shell, and I believe it was running its own little programming language. And the fun part we had on it was we'd sit down and actually design up rooms, design triggers, and you built your own quests, which at that time period it was like total wow.
And this was happening inside the university and outside as well?
Oh, yeah.
So the MUDs you were involved in are
around the nation.
Around the nation, and the mush as well?
The mush we had, there was a Star Trek mush that was at a company. And the company finally looked at it and says, look, guys, we know you enjoy this game, but we can't expend the resources anymore. And we would play on it and that, and we heard that it was shutting down. It was like, well, download the database to us and we'll set it up here. And that's what we ended up doing. We ended up running that for almost a year and a half before they moved it to another site.
What box did you run it on?
We were running it on the Ultrix box.
Do you think that's still out there somewhere?
Could be. Probably not anymore. I mean, nowadays you've got your more interactive business setup games. So I seriously doubt it. I mean,
just not graphic enough for today's.
Well, it wasn't. It was the fact that you had to know the languages. You had the multi-user dungeon, which had one language. You had a multi-user shell, which had slightly different language. You had actually Muff, which was a multi-user dungeon done in Fourth. You had a lot of varieties out there. And nowadays, I'm pretty sure most of them are dead for the simple reason that a lot of it was your chat rooms. Because, let's face it, you're running around this dungeon, and we had different areas where people would get together and sit there and chat. And you had literal rooms in it. But you also had the gaming environment. And with today's technology, it's just so grown so much that people would look back on that and look at it and go, people used to play on this? Because, let's face it, you got World of Warcraft now. You go in and you've got a true graphical environment that you're running around. And you're still chatting back and forth, but it's a lot better than go north and have this description show up.
Do you guys use like Archie and Veronica? Do you remember those?
Archie, if I remember right, wasn't that a database search engine?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. Search for
different
I think
things.
executables.
Yeah. Nowadays I've got BitShare and BitTorrent and the GNU Telenetwork.
So you were that Star Trek game. That's not the Star Trek game I've seen on PCs and mainframes.
No, this was
this is just the same kind of thing, the dungeon style.
A bunch of Trekkies got together and they decided to make their own Star Trek in MUD.
What other kind of games did you play with? Hack?
Games we played. Conquest, which was a war-type game. XConk, another war-type game, which was slightly more graphical.
XConk?
Yeah, it's still out there.
Was I wrong? It seemed like I recall. It seemed like Val and Dave had developed a pretty elaborate game.
Yes. The Casino. Yeah, Dave and Val sat down and in the way early days, before they really knew anything, they wrote themselves up a blackjack game. They thought that was pretty cool, and then they come up with a Keno table. That was pretty cool. And so a lot of the guys started writing out card games and stuff like that. The problem was the money, so Dave and Val sat down. Dave went, we need a casino, and we need to have a credit union, and they built this monster of a game system. The sad thing about it was written in C, but all of the subroutines were in H files. You had, I forget what the main program was called, something.c, and inside of it you're looking at blackjack.h, keno.h, casino.h, and you go to compile this thing, and it took 3 days to compile because none of it was actually modularized. It had to suck in all this source code and compile it. And we were, me, David Boren, and Jason. I can't remember what Jason's last name was. He was a high school student that his brother was up here. And they had talked Dave and Val into giving him an account on it. I remember the time we sat down there and we found they had a little tiny bug in their blackjack game. When you entered into the blackjack game, it would seed a random number for the cards. Well, we realized this, so we all picked the blackjack game, sat down at 3 terminals, and all hit enter at the same time, getting the same random number. Then we took and one of us went on the low table, the rest on the high table, and we added each other as players. And we'd play it on the low table, doing the minimum bet, seeing if we'd win or lose. If we lost, on the high table, we would take and put the minimum high bet. If we won, we'd put the maximum high bet. And we took and cleaned it out. And the game system itself would actually create credits. And we played this thing for about 2 hours. And we had a ton of money. We're like, Dave's going to be pissed. So we decided to be good guys, and we deposited. You had the ability to deposit into someone else's credit union account. So all 3 of us deposited our money into Dave's credit union account. We kicked back, and all of a sudden Dave goes, guys, look at the total value of what's in the credit union. You look at it, it was a negative number. And we're just sitting there going, whoa. A little bit later, Dave came and we told him what we'd done. We'd found this bug. And he's like, oh, okay, I'll have to fix that. Sits down, he logs in, pulls up his game account, and he come unglued. We'd put so much money into his account, he was using a long to keep the value. And we'd rolled it. And the credit union itself, you could take out a loan, and the way it worked when you took out a loan is it would give you a negative balance, and then it would earn negative interest. Well, when we rolled it so far that it was negative, and he was gaining more negative interest per day than he could figure out how to deal with. He ended up wiping the whole database. And then it took him about a week to go in and take and truly randomize all the games so nobody could do that again. It wasn't too long after that he finally just threw up his hands in frustration and deleted the game system.
That's funny, though.
Yeah, one of the few times I've actually seen Dave scream.
You think anybody was using that game outside of Weaver State?
Not really. You had to have an account on the back system to get to the game system.
Was it a multi-user game though? You could in fact see other players in the game.
No.
No.
Yeah.
So okay.
The only one that was multi-user was a blackjack, and then you could add players to your screen. But you couldn't actually see the cards or anything. Each one was a separate process. There was no cross communication except for deposits into your account and deposits in and out of the credit union.
Other than the MUDs, were there any multi-user games, like text-based multi-user games you were using?
The MUDs were pretty much the only text-based user games that were out there. We did have, as the internet grew, and you started getting more people in the internet, there was some games that were multi-user. We had, I can't remember the name, Crossfire, a D&D type game that you could actually go to hook up on other servers. And it was Dungeons and Dragons. There was also a Star Trek game, which we could run on the Unix Xboxes, that had multiple people, and you'd fly your spaceship around and try to blow all the other players out. But there wasn't really too many that were multi-user at that time.
What about the binaries? What were you trading? What kind of binaries? Like stuff that would run on a PC?
Stuff that would run on a PC.
Games?
Games.